Hello, everybody. Welcome to Two Way. We wanted to do a show about Pennsylvania because it is the key to this election. Most political analysts will tell you the winner of Pennsylvania will probably win. Not a sure thing, but there's no state more important on the map. It is a state, of course, that has played a huge role in American political history, and it is now the focus of the most ad spending, the most attention from candidates, surrogates, etc. So tonight, 2 hours together to talk about Pennsylvania. Got a lot of stuff planned for you. We call our motto at Two Way conversations like no other. So we were trying to do some things that are different besides going for full two hours to talk about it. So one thing is we'll have a poll. David Burrell at Wick Insights, our polling partner, will be here to talk about a special poll and why it's different than most polls done in Pennsylvania, including the sample size and also a focus on Erie. I'll show you right off the top here two results from the poll. First is our presidential horse race, and it so happens it matches up exactly with the Real Clear Politics current average in the race between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. You can go ahead and put that up now if you would. Oh, let me put this one up first. So presidential horse race statewide, 48 Trump, 47 Harris. Again, couldn't be closer. And then this is interesting to us. We broke down by gender which candidate people thought was better on certain issues. And you can do this in other polls sometimes, look at the crosstabs, but take a look. Next slide, please. Look at the gender gap, which we usually think about in terms of just the horse race. Look here, who's good for the health of democracy? Men, Trump plus 13, Harris, women, Harris plus 16. Good on immigration, Trump 32, tied for women. Good on abortion, Trump plus 1 for men, women plus 18, Harris. Good on crime and public safety, Trump plus 25, Harris plus 7. And good on the U.S. economy, Trump plus 22 for men, Harris plus 6. So David Burrell will be here to walk through the poll. There's events going on right now in Georgia, Kamala Harris's event with Spike Lee and Bruce Springsteen and others. We might dip into that. And she did a gaggle earlier today, didn't make much news. Donald Trump has an event. It's actually a relatively slow day on the campaign trail. And so lucky for us, a good opportunity to deep dive into Pennsylvania. So here's how the evening's going to unfold. We're going to look at an interview I conducted just a little bit earlier because unfortunately, Dave McCormick, the Republican Senate candidate, was not available to join us live and to take questions. But I talked to him a little earlier today. We'll look at that interview. Then we're going to have some conversation with David briefly about the poll. He'll explain how we did it, why it's different than other polls. Then one of the things I'm really looking forward to, some Pennsylvanians who are undecided voters from all over the state are going to join us and basically have a live discussion. You can call it a discussion or a focus group, but we'll bring them in to talk about how they're making their decision. I don't think you'll see that many other places. Then David will run through his slide deck, and we've got a bunch of great people here to talk to us about it, including Senator Santorum, former Senator Santorum, Brad Todd, who works for the McCormick campaign, a representative, supporter of Senator Casey, and a bunch of other folks from Pennsylvania, including the best political reporter in Pennsylvania, Selena Zito. So we'll, of course, take your questions, too. So please, if you want to get inside the conversation, please raise your hand. If you're watching on YouTube and you're new to the platform, thank you for following us and for joining. This is not a typical political platform. This is not about hate. It's about peace, love, and understanding. If you're here to write negative comments in the chat, please go somewhere else. What we want is understanding. If you love Donald Trump and someone's saying how great Kamala Harris is, use it as an opportunity to learn and not to hate. And if you're here on the Two Way platform, same thing. Feel free to engage in the chat if you wish, but we really aren't here for people to attack each other or make negative comments. Spirited debate is great. And as I said, if you want to be in the conversation, please raise your hand. So we're going to start with my conversation from just a little bit earlier today with David McCormick, who's the Republican nominee facing Democratic Senator Bob Casey in a race that you'll see in our poll and in some other public polls is now very tight. With us now, David McCormick. David, thanks for joining. What's it like now running for your second time for Senate as compared to the first time?
Well, everything feels a little more established. I know what I'm doing. I know the kind of campaign I want to run. And if anything, the mandate to run is there's more energy than ever before, because I think this is a real choice. Two very different visions of the future, both at the Senate level on the top of the ticket. And I should start by saying congratulations on what's happening here in two-way, which is this kind of civil dialogue. I think is really critical. Politics right now is so nasty, but this election really reflects a huge choice in ideas of how to take the country forward. And for me, this is all part of a broader, life of commitment to duty on our country. And what the America I know, even though I'm in the middle of a very tough campaign, the America I know is kind of the one I saw as a lieutenant in the 82nd Airborne Division, where I had a African-American kid from Newark in my platoon and a kid from rural Alabama and a platoon sergeant from Puerto Rico. But we never talked about religion. We never talked about politics. We were just part of defending our great country and being part of a team. So I think what you're doing here is great. And this is exciting because the Keystone State is obviously going to likely determine the presidency, and certainly has a lot to do with the majority in the Senate. And all eyes are on Pennsylvania, and it's exciting. And I think the momentum is really shifting.
There's a paradox in the country that's been around for a while, but tightened now, and it's true in Pennsylvania, which is red-blue divide, media is divided, a lot of very tough partisanship. And yet most Pennsylvanians aren't like that, even if they're a member of a party.
Yeah.
How do you see that divide? How do you see the conflict between division in Pennsylvania, very tough politics in your race and presidential race in Harrisburg, and yet most Pennsylvanians would say be about problem solving and not acrimony?
Well, if you step back, there's some really fundamental shifts happening. The party, Republican Party, is growing in Pennsylvania really dramatically. I'm sure you've seen the registration numbers, but when President Trump won in 2016, there was 1 million more registered Democrats than Republicans. And today it's under 300,000. It's like 298,000. It's moved a lot. Every day I get a new update, 3, 4, 5,000 have moved. So this is a huge shift. And I think it's reflective of a basic belief that government has failed most Pennsylvanians, and it's gotten particularly worse over the last 3.5 years. So economically, 60% of Pennsylvanians are living paycheck to paycheck. They are suffering under sky-high inflation, skyrocketing prices. The fentanyl crisis is hurting all Americans. It's killed 4,000 Pennsylvanians last year. Law and order in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh is in decline. Violent crime is up. That's moving to the suburbs. That is a defining issue. And energy, energy is the long pole in the tent for Pennsylvania's future, natural gas in particular. And so you see a huge debate around these four issues, with 75% of Pennsylvanians thinking the country's going in the wrong direction. And so the reason I outline those problems is those problems aren't Republican problems or Democrat problems or independent problems. Those problems affect all Pennsylvanians. And I think you're seeing, at least in my case, and I think in President Trump's as well, trying to run a campaign that builds a coalition that, of course, is the building block is a strong Republican base and a strong turnout, but that's also appealing to others because these problems are affecting everybody. And so even though it's a tough partisan fight, as you would expect it to be, given the stakes are so high, I think the political currents or cross currents cut across party.
Is there a consensus view in Pennsylvania, do you think, over what to do about the Ukraine war?
No, I don't think there is. I don't think there's a consensus view in Pennsylvania, maybe even in the Republican Party, obviously. I think there's probably a growing consensus that we need the conflict to end and that there's been such bloodshed on both sides. My position is that we should support Ukraine with military aid, but that also Europeans need to step up. France and Germany need to do more than they've done, and that we need to bring this to a close because it's becoming horrifically painful for all involved. Lots of civilian loss, and I think it's more likely to come to an end if President Trump's in the White House, and I think he will bring it to an end.
Is there a consensus view in Pennsylvania about whether America can be and should be a manufacturing country?
Yeah, I absolutely feel a consensus within the Republican Party, and I think the Democrats say that, but I think their policies run counter to that. And let me describe what I mean by that. I think what President Trump's talking about and what I've reinforced is the notion of fair trade. And fair trade means there's certain key industries you got to have here at home. We learned that during COVID: pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, advanced manufacturing. But then the rest of our trades needs to be driven by the principle of reciprocity. We need to have a fair deal. We can't have non-tariff trade barriers. We can't have tariffs. We can't have government subsidies. If American workers have the chance to compete on a level playing field, they will win. They will succeed. And so our trade policy needs to be guided by that. And tariffs can be used very, very smartly and strategically to make sure we get that kind of trade policy. That's what happened with the steel tariffs. I think that's the kind of policies you'll see to bring manufacturing back to Pennsylvania, back to America, particularly most advanced levels of manufacturing. But it's not just trade that's the problem. Inflation has been really doing a huge damage to small manufacturers because their price of their materials are going up and they're not getting that on the price side. So they're getting squeezed. And regulations have made it harder and harder. All of this is tied, in my opinion, to unlocking energy. Because if Pennsylvania can be a low-cost energy provider, that's going to have much more appeal. And what the Biden administration has done with hundreds of billions of dollars of subsidies for fossil fuels, for wind, for solar, really has come at the expense of basic manufacturing, and certainly come at the expense of our fossil fuel industry. We need to not ban fracking. So the discussion is now about who should we ban or not ban fracking, with Kamala Harris saying, at least previously, she wanted to ban fracking. But in many ways, the Democrats have banned fracking without actually banning it, through regulation, through red tape, through EPA mandates. And my point of view, and I think President Trump's, is we need to unlock that. The fracking jobs in Pennsylvania shouldn't just be maintained. They should be doubled or tripled or quadrupled, because natural gas and fracking is not only the key to the economic growth in Pennsylvania, bringing low-cost manufacturing back, but it's also key to our national security, to be a net energy exporter. It's also key to the environment. The reason carbon emissions have dropped so precipitously in the United States is because of the fracking revolution. We need to export that natural gas around the world.
The schools, the crime, the lack of economic opportunity in our biggest cities, including your two big cities, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, has gone on for a long time under Democratic mayors. You believe in a free market. Politics should be subject to the laws of the free market. How do you explain the failure of your party to nominate and run candidates in big cities like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh to offer free market solutions instead of what's been tried for decades and failed the people you'd want to have as your constituents?
Well, I think, I think we'll see. I think we're making some progress on that. I would agree that the stranglehold that the Democratic Party has had on our cities, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia in particular, has led to only more absence of opportunity for the communities that live there, often minority communities. The crime in these communities has skyrocketed. The educational attainment is at all-time lows. And so if you think the American dream and the responsibility of all policymakers, but in the Republican Party, our responsibility is to bring that opportunity to everybody, to have the American dream be available to everyone. The American dream being, if you work hard, you're going to have the opportunity to grow and excel and have financial independence and have your kids have a better life than you have. School choice, in my opinion, is one of the key things that's going to unlock that opportunity. And unfortunately,
just take that one before you go forward. Yeah. Why hasn't school choice, when so many parents want it, why has your party failed to be able to sell that?
Well, I think our party's succeeding. It's not succeeded yet in Pennsylvania, but I think it's succeeding. So look what's happened post-COVID. I think COVID was a gift to the school choice movement, because what happened is parents looked over their kids' shoulders during COVID and they found the quality of education wanting. The teachers' unions, of course, have had a stranglehold on this issue, and the Democratic Party. But what happened after that is you're starting to see real breakthroughs in Florida, in Georgia, in Tennessee, in Arkansas. I've had all these governors come visit and campaign with me. There's huge movement on school choice. And we were on the verge of having that in Pennsylvania when Governor Shapiro was elected. And then frankly, he blinked after coming into office and didn't push through on some of the promises he had made for school choice. But I think we're going to get there. And when I'm campaigning yesterday in Philadelphia in minority communities, I hear this time and again that parents and students want the choice. And let's face it, Mark, this is the sad thing about it. The school choice does exist. It just exists for people who have money. And the people that will be most empowered by having taxpayer dollars channeled to the kid, giving choice and opportunity are often kids at the lowest levels socioeconomically, and that's going to be the building block for repairing our cities. We got to have law and order too. I think the law and order goes hand in hand with school choice.
Yeah.
And listen, this has been a bunch of very liberal policies. Larry Krasner type district attorneys in places like Philadelphia. My opponent, Bob Casey, has supported Larry Krasner. A defund the police movement. My opponent has been endorsed by the defund the police group in Philadelphia. That's why the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police in Pennsylvania, have switched their endorsement from Bob Casey to me, because you need to have law and order in these communities to have healthy families and successful schools. So it's all tied together. I agree with you. We've failed to break into that thus far, but I think there's some cracks in the ice.
All right, last question. Give me 2 Philadelphia tourism tips that are not like go to Hershey Park or go see the Liberty Bell. Like, what's a great food restaurant? What's a great place to stay? What's a great park? Just give me 2.
Well, the thing that I've done for years, for 20 years, Dean and I have done this with the kids. We go to Philadelphia for the Army Navy game. It is historic. But the thing we do, we don't just go to the art museum and run up the steps. We do a run through the streets of Philadelphia. I make the kids sing the Rocky song. And we run up the Rocky steps, and then we take pictures by the Rocky statues. So that is part of the lore. So that's certainly something. And the thing I just did recently, which I hadn't done, but was really meaningful, and I'd recommend it to your viewers, is Washington's Crossing, rather, where you see the place where Washington crossed the Delaware with a very sordid band, and essentially turned the war around. And when you hear what those brave souls did, often many of them without shoes, in freezing waters, which really led to the America we have today, you see real bravery, and it makes whatever sacrifices those of us that are trying to seek public office feel like we go through. It makes it seem small compared to what so many have done to get America to what it is today.
What percentage of the vote are you going to get?
Well, I think it'll be very extremely close. I feel great. I will win or lose by 1 or 2 points. I think I'm going to win, and the reason I think I'm going to win is it's a real change election. I'm the change candidate. Bob Casey's the status quo candidate, and I definitely have the momentum. And I think I'm going to be able to build a coalition that's not just Republicans. I think you're going to see conservative Democrats and members of the trades and members of the Jewish community. I think I'm going to be able to put together some of the key minority communities. I think I'm going to be able to put together a coalition that's a winning one. I'm excited about it, and I'd certainly be honored to be the senator from Pennsylvania.
Do you have any nicknames?
No, I have no nickname.
No.
Well, Dean
Right.
has names for me. Dean has names for me, but they're not repeatable.
If you win by 1 point, we'll call you Landslide McCormick from now on.
There you go. I'll take it.
David, thank you for making time, part of Pennsylvania.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Nice to talk to you.
All right, so that was our interview. We asked Senator Casey if he would join us. He was not able to, but we'll have a supporter of his later here. Joining us now, 2 great men. I don't like to think of people as just former, but they're both former elected officials in the state. Senator Santorum, outstanding shirt. Mayor Bill Peduto of Pittsburgh. Gentlemen, both thank you. I want to just talk to you briefly, have you back to talk about other stuff. But Mayor, why has the Senate race gotten tighter? Regardless of who's going to win, it's gotten tighter. Why has Senator Casey lost his lead?
I think you've seen that happen throughout the state, and I don't think it's really a surprise. There's still 2 weeks to go, and that's a lifetime in politics, especially when you're looking at 4 news cycles a day. But right now, I think the races that we're looking at statewide have all basically pulled it within the margin of error.
And if you were to list the advantages that Senator Casey has in the race, what are his advantages?
Well, there's been a lot of loss with traditional labor. You see a lot of folks, especially in the building trade, voting Republican. The one thing that Bob Casey has not lost is the support of labor.
Okay. Senator Santorum, great to see you. Thank you for joining. I'll ask you the same question. What has Dave McCormick done to close the gap? Or is it just as the mayor says, natural tightening, all the races have gotten closer?
Well, I think Dave has run a uniquely good campaign. I mean, it's the best campaign run against Bob Casey, and I ran against Bob Casey, so I can tell you from experience, it's not an easy thing to do. A couple of things that have really worked in his favor. Number one is you showed this on your graphic, is the environment's really terrible for Democrats. I mean, this race is, if you look at where Democrats score on the most important issues, they're way behind. And if you look at the mood of the country, right direction, wrong direction. I mean, the country's in wrong direction. If this were almost any other election year, and I have said this, and you and I've had this conversation, but for Donald Trump, sort of a vanilla Republican candidate, given these numbers, should be actually pretty solidly ahead. And I think Dave is benefiting from that environment. I think Eric Hubby in Wisconsin and Mike Rogers and others. Let's leave Rogers out. As someone who in 1994 got elected to the United States Senate in a wave year, where we picked up 9 seats in the United States Senate, only 2 of those seats did we defeat Democratic incumbents. It is really hard to defeat Democratic incumbents. Number one, they have a huge financial advantage. They have media. They have a lot of real great advantages that Republican candidates simply don't have. And they also have a much superior ground game. The Democratic Party is just, eats our lunch on the ground. So there's a lot of inherent advantages that Democratic incumbents have, and makes it almost impossible to beat them. The fact that it's likely to beat John Tester in Montana is just testament to, how, again, the underlying environment is just negative for Democrats. And I think that's helped Dave a lot. But the fact that he has been able to raise the money, I listened to Dave here just in your interview, and I campaigned with Dave when he ran to the primary 2 years ago. That is not the same candidate. I mean, he has upped his game. He is sharp. He understands. He's obviously been talking to voters, listening to them, channeling some of their concerns, channeling some of the messaging and optimism. It's one of the things I like about Dave. He's a very optimistic, forward-thinking kind of guy, and I think that's just really catching on. And look, Casey has the biggest advantage Bob Casey has: 2, incumbency; 3, is Bob Casey, his name. And he has a name that is legendary in the state of Pennsylvania, and he's used it to his great advantage. But I think, at least the polls I've looked at, and you'll share it tonight, the polls I've looked at, that name, as generations go by, is less and less of an impact because they don't remember his dad. Most of the polls I've looked at, not all of them, but most of the polls I've looked at, the only age demographic that Bob Casey is winning is people over 65. And that tells you a little bit about why they're voting for Bob Casey, not necessarily the job he's done, but the legacy that he upholds.
Okay, I want to ask you both one presidential question, and then we'll bring you back. Mr. Mayor, Scranton Joe was your party's nominee, and he obviously had a great cultural affinity for the state, born in the state, represented the neighboring state. What makes Kamala Harris a great Pennsylvania fit?
Well, first off, and I think Senator Santorum would say it, Joe Biden was Pennsylvania's 3rd senator.
Yeah.
And he had an affinity for the state that was real. Kamala has the ability to build off of the legacy that he has, but to also be able to get into some of the areas that are going to be absolutely critical on election day for turnout. And namely, that is within minority community and with college campuses. Her ability to be able to be more in touch with college students, even as we're at war with Gaza, is a absolutely critical part for victory in Pennsylvania. Her ability to turn out vote within the African-American community is also going to be an absolutely critical part of these next 2 weeks in the GOTV efforts that will be happening mainly in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia.
Senator Santorum, the more I look at the map, and we talked to Karl Rove about it this afternoon, the more I wonder if Donald Trump can do well enough in the Philly suburbs to win this election. What are his challenges now in those suburbs?
It's interesting. He has great challenges there, and his advantage is that he has appeal to blue collar workers, and that appeal in this election cycle seems to be broadening to people of color who are blue collar workers, and that's an opportunity. I mean, you go to Delaware County, for example. I mean, Delaware County certainly has some very wealthy areas along the river. Another place, there are a lot of blue collar folks who the areas that border Philadelphia. There are a lot of blue collar workers in Delco, and that's an opportunity for him. Same thing in Lower Bucks, which is the most Democratic. Well, that and Central Bucks, the most Democratic area. But again, Lower Bucks is a lot of blue collar workers and a lot of union members that Bill was talking about that Trump has been able to pull away, and so I think that's his real opportunity. I've been looking at some polling from some House and Senate races, state House, state Senate races from some of the swing districts in the Southeast. And in every single one of those swing districts, Trump is running better than he ran in 2020. It's really interesting. Well, I will say that I've looked at some of the competitive races up in northeastern Pennsylvania. Bill mentioned Biden's home area and being the sort of the third Pennsylvania senator. And interestingly enough, Trump is not running better up there than he was in 2020, which you would think because of the Biden poll. But I think in this case, just conjecture, don't know, but in this case, I think Casey actually might be helping Harris up there as opposed to the other way around. So my point is the suburban Philly races that I looked at, Trump was actually running better and in swing districts. Now, we weren't polling West Philly. We weren't polling, Lower Marion. We weren't polling some of the real dark blue areas. But in some of the areas where Trump underperformed, he was actually doing better in those areas.
Great. I'm so grateful for you both being here. If you can stick around, please do. I think you're going to like the two things we've coming up, and we want to get you back in to comment. So thank you both for being here. And again,
Sure.
Stick around if you can. Thank you. Let's bring in David Burrell now, our polling partner, Wick Insights. David, would love for you to explain to folks what's distinctive, what's different about the poll you did, and talk about the oversampling of Erie and why you did that.
Sure. Yeah. So it was really more than oversample. We really ran two polls, and that was one of the unique things. But so three things about this, polling now is one is a great time to poll. People are very highly civically engaged, and a lot of that roller coaster of polling results that you see in the summer and even in the early fall starts to level out here. That's one of the reasons why the race tightens. So it's a great time to be running a poll in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania. Secondly is we did a very large sample size. We're at over 2,300 completes in Philadelphia of random sampling, and then also a probability sampling. And then we're also at nearly 900 completes in Erie.
Right. So David, a typical poll by a media organization or an academic organization would be how many completes, how many interviews would be?
It's all over the place now, but the range you'll see is somewhere from 600 completes. There's a lot of the ones, especially when you see people doing battleground polls that's going across 7 states or so. Oftentimes they're well less than 1,000 completes per state. And and you can see some as high as 2,000, but most of the time they're closer to 1,000 completes.
Yeah. Okay. So go ahead and tell folks again why it's distinctive.
Right. So one is we did it side by side, and I'll kind of piggyback off what Senator Santorum said a second ago, is that you can tell a lot of information by looking at some of the local polling. He was talking about probably state Senate, state House swing districts, but looking at a statewide poll along with a swing county poll like Erie is really, really unique. It allows you to check your data against each other. And then also doing a large sample sizes allows you to really catch mistakes or catch problems with the sample, because you're able to look at, for example, African Americans that don't make up a large percentage in Pennsylvania or in Erie County, but are having, building big storylines in this race for them trending for Trump. We're able to kind of get enough complete so we can start to recognize, hey, is this real? Is there a problem with the data? And that's some of the stuff we'll talk about when we kind of get into the poll. So there's just a lot of things as a pollster that go along with a large sample size and being able to look at data side by side, both statewide and then in swing areas.
Great. So David will be back in just a little bit. He'll run through the full deck of the poll. which has all the things we talked about. And then Ann Seltzer, the great pollster from Iowa, who understands polling like as well as anyone, and some other folks will colloquy and we'll take your questions about the poll. So David, thank you. We'll bring you back in just a bit. Now, going to bring in some folks from Pennsylvania. This is a live focus group. We'll see what happens. A bunch of undecided people who agreed to participate. We're going to bring them in. We'll meet them all, and we're going to talk about where they are in their deliberative process. So go ahead and bring folks in one by one. Here we go. Kim, welcome in. Tell folks where you live in Pennsylvania and who you're deciding between at this point, please.
I live in Lehigh County, and I am deciding between Trump and Harris.
Trump and Harris. Okay. And who have you voted for president in 2020 between Joe Biden, Donald Trump, or other?
In 2020, I voted for Biden.
Okay. Thank you for joining, Kim. Daryl, tell folks where you live in Pennsylvania and who you're deciding between.
I live in Montgomery County, and I'm deciding between not voting at all and voting for Trump.
Okay. And who did you vote for last time, if you voted?
2016, I voted for Trump, and 2020, I voted for Trump as well.
Okay. Thank you for joining also. Allison, welcome in. Where do you live in Pennsylvania? And tell folks who you're deciding between. Hold on one second, Allison. We're having trouble with your mic. Try one more time. You are unmuted.
How about now? I'm sorry.
There you go. All good. Go ahead.
I live in Pittsburgh, and I am deciding between voting for Harris and Trump for president.
Okay. Thank you, Allison. Josh, where do you live in the state, Commonwealth, and who are you deciding between?
I'm in Monroe County. I'm deciding between, oh boy, I hope my family isn't on here, Trump and Harris.
Okay. Who'd you vote for in 20?
I voted for Biden.
Okay. Linda, welcome in. Tell folks where you live in the Commonwealth and who you're deciding between.
Hi, I'm Linda. Can you hear me?
Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
deciding between Trump and Harris,
Yeah.
but I'm really leaning towards Trump.
Okay. And where do you live in the Commonwealth?
O'Hara Township, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, suburbs.
Okay. Okay, great. Carl, welcome. Tell folks where you live in the Commonwealth and who you're deciding between.
Hi there, I live in Reading, which is in Berks County. I am deciding between leaving the top line open or possibly Harris, although that's a small likelihood.
Okay, thank you. Ellen, welcome in. Tell folks where you live in the Commonwealth and who you're deciding between.
Good evening. I live in Allegheny County, and I'm deciding between Harris and Trump, and I abstained from voting in the last presidential election.
Okay, thank you. Carson, welcome in. Where do you live in the Commonwealth and who are you deciding between?
Hey, how's it going? I'm in Montgomery County as well, Collegeville, Pennsylvania, and all choices are still on the table right now. I can go independent, I could go green, I could go no vote, or the major parties.
Okay. Really generous of you all to make time. And we're going to have a spirited conversation, and you should speak up. Your mics are all open. You don't need to wait to be called on. Just jump right in. If somebody says something and you want to pick up on it, please do. Kim, start with you. Why is this a tough choice for you? Is it because you like them both so much or something else?
No, it's more that I don't like either one. Now, I did vote for Trump in 2016, and that was more so anti-Clinton voting than it was being in love with Trump. And I really thought that I would be on board with Harris because I'm tired of Trump. I'm tired of the media and everything is anti-Trump. But I'm just really struggling finding any reason to vote for Harris. So I have thought about not voting, but I feel like that would be irresponsible as a voter. So I feel like I have to make a choice, but there is I don't know anything at right now today that has me convinced that I should vote for Harris.
Okay. Tell me, somebody speak up. Tell me something that's currently making you feel like you might vote for Vice President Harris, something that's appealing about her that as you think about who to vote for, you say, well, that's a plus to vote for the Vice President.
She's loyal. She's
Loyal.
really loyal to the president. And the rest of my family loves her.
Okay. What else do people find it politically attractive about the vice president that tempts you to vote for her?
I think the one thing that I would say is that she's more likely than Trump to sort of to be closer to a respect for institutions of government and structures.
Okay. What
I
other
guess-
people? Anybody? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll say that the way the United States handles the Russia-Ukraine situation is pretty important to me. I like the way Biden handled it. I guess even though she's trying to separate herself from the Biden presidency, I do think moving in a similar direction with respect to Ukraine is a positive.
If you were thinking about voting for governor of Pennsylvania, not president, but governor of Pennsylvania, and the candidates were Trump and Harris, I'll go around and ask you to vote. To say, who would you vote for governor of Pennsylvania, Trump or Harris? Daryl.
That's easy, Trump.
Kim.
Trump.
Allison.
Trump.
Josh.
I don't know.
Okay. Linda.
Trump.
Okay. Karsten.
Definitely Trump.
Carl.
That's very difficult. I probably would abstain.
Okay. Ellen.
It's difficult, but fracking, Trump.
Okay. So I'm curious, you all are none of you are currently for Harris, but all of you were for Trump, or almost all of you were for Trump for governor. Why is he more attractive as governor than as president? It's an easy choice. Daryl, why is that an easier choice for you than for president?
Well, one of the things I primarily vote on is foreign policy. And, I voted for Trump in 16 and 20 because I really believe he was like an anti-war candidate. And I think he did a pretty good job in that regard. But this election around, I don't ever hear him talk about that. It just seems like let's go arm Israel to the teeth. Let's go after Iran. I do agree with him on Ukraine. I think it's an easy thing to fix really quickly. So that's a huge positive. But why would I just jump at if he was trying to do governor? Well, there's no foreign policy, really.
Got it.
Domestic
Okay.
policy, I fully agree.
Does somebody else want to have an answer to that question? Why is he an obvious choice for you for governor, but not necessarily for president? Anybody else have a point of view on that?
Well, as I said, the fracking is extremely important to the Pennsylvania economy, and I think he's been much more consistent in his views of that than Vice President Harris.
Okay. I want to go around and ask you for one word answer, two if you have to, but 1 or 2 words. Tell me what word you most associate with Vice President Harris. Okay, 1 or 2 words. Allison.
Unqualified.
Unqualified. Carl.
Unexceptional.
Ellen.
Graceful and positive.
Okay. Josh.
Loyal.
Kim.
Insincere.
Daryl.
Totally unqualified.
Okay. Linda.
Unqualified.
All right. And Karsten.
Unprincipled.
Okay. And same for Donald Trump. Allison, 1 word.
Aggressive.
Okay. Carl.
Unacceptable.
Ellen.
Courageous and business-minded.
Josh.
Strong.
Kim.
Arrogant.
Okay. Daryl.
Determined to create a legacy.
Okay. Linda.
Strong. Sorry, Josh, you took my.
Yeah, that's okay. You can repeat. Karsten.
Narcissistic.
Okay. I want to just reset a little bit for those who are maybe missed early on. If you voted for a Democrat for president, Hillary Clinton in 16 or Biden in 20, either one or both, please raise your hand. If you voted for either Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, or both, okay? So 2 of you voted previously for Democrats. Okay. Raise your hand if you voted for Trump both times in 16 and 20. Okay. So only 2 of you voted for him twice. Okay. I want to talk about issues that you feel are not being addressed by the 2 presidential candidates that are important to you. What's something that's important to you, your family, your community, that you don't hear the candidates talking about, and you'd like to hear them talking about it? Okay, Carl, kick us off.
Serious fiscal reform, especially spending and entitlements.
Okay. Jump in. Anybody else? What are some issues that you'd like to hear
For
talked
me,
about?
I know someone was against Israel. For me, it's pro-Israel. I heard the vice president last night asked on a town hall about Israel twice, and she dodged the question both times.
Okay. Others, what are issues you'd like to hear about?
Healthcare and pharmaceutical. They don't talk about healthcare. And when you have issues, you realize how important it is. And I'm glad this is the last year of the donut hole. Nobody ever talked about the donut hole unless you're in the situation. But it's very important.
Linda, are you interested in them talking about quality of care, cost of care, both?
Both quality and cost. And if you're over 65 and you have Medicare and a supplement or advantage, and you end up having issues when the time comes for renewing, you cannot get out of your health care and join another health care. They deny you. I'm not sure everybody knows that. And I have been denied to go into a new health care, and because of my health issues. And they're not major, but I guess to them it is, but they just denied me.
Yeah. Kim, what's something you'd like to hear them talk about?
Well, foreign policy is incredibly important to me. And I guess there's, China, I hear Israel but China, North Korea. I don't think there's really any substantive conversation around foreign policy.
Okay. Go ahead, Ellen. Jump right in.
I think what's happening in our inner cities and the lack of education and more in the crime, and I just think much more specifics about that and versus all the aid we give all over the world, and we don't I don't think we're taking care of our own citizens, especially vulnerable young people and families, and I don't think we've heard enough about that or have had that highlighted, the all the killings and things like that.
Any of you gotten direct mail about the presidential campaign in your mailbox? Raise your hand if you've gotten anything in your mailbox. Yeah, every day. Yeah, and I won't ask who's seen ads on TV. Do any of those things, anything you hear on TV, radio, see on the internet, get in your mailbox, do any of those things influence you and how you think about the race?
I feel they're all lies.
They're all lies? Okay. Daryl, go ahead.
I saw something today posted actually by Trump on Twitter, and it was an ad that said like Trump Vance is the Israel ticket, and it hits him standing behind or in front of an Israeli flag. And that's not a turn on, that's a huge turn off. Like, I'm voting for the American president, not the Israeli president. Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody feel go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say it's not necessarily mail or commercials, but we just have a lot of signs all over the place. And I think somebody on the morning meeting was talking about how they were upset that, people like, especially towards the end of the campaign, were trying to like infantilize the voters.
Yeah.
And a lot of the signs just say like Trump safety, Kamala crime. I'm like, okay, you're just going to put out signs that say Trump good, Kamala bad, and that's what I'm supposed to make a decision based off of. So those are a huge turnoff, and those are most of the really simplistic ones that assume that I have the mindset of a third grader are from the Trump side of things.
Has anybody seen anything you can recall in an ad, piece of direct mail, or billboard, anything you've seen that influenced you in a positive way that you remember and you said, yeah, that's something that really speaks to me and maybe will influence how I decide who to vote for? Anybody?
I'd say I already kind of knew about it, but the Trump trans ad on Kamala doing the trans surgeries for prisoners, I thought that was super effective. And I've heard from other people who just sort of saw that ad, who maybe didn't know about the issue, and were pretty shocked to see that.
Yeah. The vice president hasn't been in the race for very long, and a lot of people don't know much about her as compared to how much they know about Donald Trump. Raise your hand if you think you understand her positions on issues. Raise your hand if you think you understand her positions.
What positions?
Okay. Karsten, yes. Karsten, how have you learned about her positions?
I mean, it might have been a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek hand raise because I'm pretty sure her positions on everything are whatever is expedient at the moment, and they're non-positions. So, I mean, I watch every single town hall that I can because I'm trying to gather as much information, all the town halls, all the interviews, every single thing, and I listen to the answers to the questions. I've even started making notes too, just to see what the consistency is across them. So,
Okay.
yeah.
I want to go around and ask you all questions. Same question about President Trump. And you can reference back to your colleagues' answers here. If they said what you believe, you can just repeat it. If he called you up after watching this and said, I don't want you to be undecided, I want you to vote for me, why aren't you voting for me? Okay. Donald Trump asked you that question and you were being honest in your response to him. Daryl, what would you say, Mr. President?
Oh, it's so easy. It's so easy. All he has to do is like put up any of the most mild criticism of Israel. Like that's it. He can get my vote right now.
Yeah. If he
It'd be
criticizes
so
Israel.
easy.
Okay.
So easy.
Okay. Kim, what would you say? Mr. President, just what?
Foreign policy for me.
But what about foreign policy? What do you
I
want
want
him
him
to
to
say?
talk about China. I want him to talk about North Korea, Russia. That's what I want him to focus on and not demean and just pick at other people. Like just give up that energy there and focus it on policy and things that matter to people.
Okay. Allison, what could President Trump do to earn your vote?
I think I echo what Kim's saying, just a slightly more respectful approach that seems a little bit less based on personal attacks.
Okay. Josh.
Have Elon Musk get in touch with me and tell him that, yes, I'll take the $1 million that he's giving out each day.
Okay. That's a good
I'd
answer.
say outside of that,
Yeah.
I'd like to hear his ideas that don't involve chaos, which I don't know if he's capable of.
Okay. Linda.
Stop with the stupid comments. He just makes so many stupid comments. And if I vote for you, I'm not voting for your personality. I'm voting for your policy. But stop with the dumb, stupid comments.
Karsten.
I would say actually stand up and support freedom and democracy and get Russia out of Ukraine and Crimea.
Ellen.
Stick to the issues. Stop wasting our time being disrespectful to other people and going off on tangents.
Yep. Carl.
Yeah, I think keeping with the general theme, I think that this is completely hypothetical because I never voted for him before, and I won't, even though I was a Republican for 34 years. But if he hypothetically said, I'll be a serious person, I apologize for the disrespect I've shown to the constitutional structures and institutions, and I'll name serious people to my administration, then that would hypothetically lure me to a vote for him.
You all know, I'm sure, that President Trump is constantly told publicly and privately to do exactly what you all have said. So I want to ask the question. I just throw it open to the group. And again, jump in. You don't need to wait to be called on. What is it about President Trump that you think keeps him from following that advice? Allison, you start us off, but everybody just jump in. What is it about him that keeps him from doing exactly what you and many other Americans say he should do?
I think he's someone who very much kind of does his own thing. He has a lot of faith in his ability to get things done, which has made him successful in business. But I think he often has a hard time. I mean, his initial platform was running on changing things up and, not trying to get away from just kind of trying to change things up, the whole like drain the swamp slogan of his. So
everybody, hold on. Everybody think about your answer, but show of hands. How many of you like your neighboring state, New Jersey's Bruce Springsteen? Raise your hand if you like Bruce Springsteen. All right. Some of you. Let's go live to the Harris rally just to sample what Bruce Springsteen's doing. We'll come back.
Well, a dog's on me. Main Street howl, 'cause they understand. If I could take this moment into my hands, mister, I ain't a boy, no, I'm a man, and I believe in the promised land, and I believe in the promised land, and I believe in the promised land.
All right. My next question is, how many of you are more likely to vote for Kamala Harris because Bruce Springsteen played at her event? Raise your hand. Nobody. All right, I didn't think so. All right, Allison, good answer. Does anybody else have an analysis of why President Trump doesn't follow the advice and the admonition from so many voters and some of his own advisors? What is it about his psychology? Yes, go ahead. Just jump in, Ellen. You don't need to raise your hand.
I guess I do think watching him in the early days of his presidency in 2016, he was very cordial with Nancy Pelosi and with Chuck Schumer, and I think he wanted to have a much more cordial relationship. He had great relationships with Democrats, and he may have even been one, I don't know, earlier in his life. But I feel like he has literally been under attack since he went down that escalator. In a way, I've never seen anybody under attack, and I can't believe that doesn't affect your mental health and your, how you react every day. And I think that if he had a less attacks going on, I think he would be less, I don't know what you want to call it, so much in a fight all the time with everybody, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think
Go ahead, Kim.
he feels he's been successful, right? He won before, and he has been the same Donald Trump when he was doing The Apprentice, and his personality is what it is, and it got him the presidency the first time. So I think he just believes, I know what I'm doing. I was successful before, and I'm not going to change.
Okay. Show of hands, your choices are going to be Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. Show of hands. Who's fighting harder to win the Pennsylvania's electoral votes? Which one seems to you to be fighting harder? Raise your hand if you think President Trump is fighting harder to win, working harder, fighting harder. Okay. And raise your hand if you think Vice President Harris is fighting harder, working harder. All right. So Kim and Daryl, you think it's a tie?
Yeah, I don't see any material difference other than Elon Musk, committing a lot of time and money into the state. I don't know if you want to include him in the campaign, maybe. In that case, I would say they're doing a better job. But if you exclude Elon, I would say it's about the same.
Yeah. If you think about Donald Trump winning and becoming president, go around, Daryl, start with you. What's your biggest worry if Donald Trump is president? What's your biggest worry, Daryl?
War with Iran, arming Israel to they're already going crazy, killing all these people. I'm extremely worried that all the money that he has received from these Israeli-related groups, just going to fuel a fire to that situation and make it so much worse.
Linda, thank you, Daryl. Linda, what's your biggest worry if Donald Trump's president?
I'm not worried if he gets in. He was president before and things were a lot better.
Okay. Karsten, what's your biggest worry?
More Supreme Court hijinks.
Okay. Josh?
I would say the word I used before, chaos. I'm afraid of the chaos that might come with him.
Ellen?
I think sort of more the what might happen like if he wants to reduce government with Elon Musk with his efficiency thing, which I think is a really good idea. How the government workers are going to react to that, and are they going to respect that?
Yep. Carl?
I think that he would fill his administration with really the worst of his sycophants. I think the saving grace of his first term was that there were some serious people that I think served us all well and kept things at a minimum until they were sort of forced out.
Okay. Allison?
I would say just greater division in American society in general and in our government. I think depending on how the Senate and House races go, if he is elected, the Democrats are going to try to push forward a lot more. They're definitely going to push harder against anything he tries to get through. And I just think it's going to be hard to get anything cohesive done.
Okay. And Kim.
I agree with Allison. I think
Yeah.
just the divisiveness among the American people and the media coverage of him, it will be an awful 4 years.
In the last few days, the vice president has started to talk about Donald Trump as a fascist, as someone who's spoken approvingly of Hitler. Raise your hand if you've heard about those comments. Okay. What do folks think? Is that something that's persuasive to you? Is that something that you'll factor into your vote? Linda.
To me, it's horrible that she's saying that about him. If he was saying that about her, everybody would be up in arms. I just don't think that's right to come in.
Thank you, sorry, Linda. What other folks think about what the vice president's saying based on accounts of people who've worked with the President Trump? What do folks think about her making those charges and those characterizations?
She obviously thinks it's going to help her. I don't think it does at all. I don't know why, if it was Kelly who heard the president say that, I'm not saying he did or he didn't. I don't think he'd lie. I think you said that, Mark, on an episode. But I think that he had a responsibility to resign the day that was said, if that's true. I don't think that's the case.
Okay. What do other folks think?
I can't. I think part of the reason why I'm being pushed towards Trump so strongly is that I find that the Democrats and the left just keep going straight to Hitler all of the time with everything. Like it, and if it's not the left pushing Hitler, it's the right pushing Stalin. So it's like we're fighting World War II every single day for every single election. So it's so exhausting. I think it just detracts from, it pushes me away from their position, and it, it's so hyperbolic that it makes it impossible to have good discussions, and I think it ruins the discourse.
Does anybody think it's valuable or something you want to hear from the vice president? Anybody? Raise your hand if you think this is something that's important for her to be talking about. Anybody? Okay. Donald Trump has described and his campaign have described the vice president as weak, failed, and dangerously liberal. Okay. Show of hands, one by one. Do you think of the vice president as a political leader as weak? Raise your hand if you think of her as weak. Okay. Raise your hand if you think of her as failed. Okay. And raise your hand if you think of her as dangerously liberal. Okay. All right. So about half of you. In this election, the stakes are quite high, obviously. Talk about how much tension, and Josh, you start because you alluded to it. How much tension is there in your family, in your community, in your workplace over this election?
Actually, there's very little because my family would just assume that I'm voting for Harris. So I've said nothing to dissuade them. And in my workplace, it's just the opposite. I've got a company in Luzerne County, and I don't know anyone who's voting for Harris. And I just kind of go along to get along is really what I see.
So everybody at home is for Harris and everybody at work is for Trump?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
What are other folks experiencing in your communities, in your family, in your workplaces about this? Is it a source of tension or not?
It's terrible. It's worse than it was the first time that we had this whole Trump thing. Like, I had a huge fight with my aunt and my mom about this a couple days ago, ironically on Facebook. So if that doesn't categorize all of our lives right now, then I don't know what does. But I mean, it's kind of amazing. I think everybody in my social circle is strongly either on work or friends or in my family are staunchly, I wouldn't say necessarily pro-Harris, but anti-Trump. And they're violently anti-Trump to the point of blocking me, etc., demonizing me. So it's not fun.
Yeah, sorry about that. Is anyone else having a similar experience in any part of your life?
I would say for me, most people are one or the other. So I would say my family is split. So I don't know that I have a lot of people who are undecided. It's either they're Harris or they're Trump. Where I live, I am surrounded by Trump signs. Where I work, it's very pro-Harris. Where I grew up, it's very Trump. But even my family, I would say, is 50-50.
Okay. Raise your hand again if you're considering voting for Vice President Harris. If that's still an option for you, raise your hand and keep them up, please. Keep them up. All right. So everybody but Daryl and Linda are considering it. Just go around. If you did vote for her, Kim, tell me what's the reason. If you vote for her in the end, the reason would be what?
That I don't want 4 more years of everyone pointing fingers at Trump. And Harris would come out showing conviction like she does around abortion and around hating Donald Trump. I feel like those are the two things that she has really, she stands up, says what she believes, and you believe her. If she did that with more issues, I would probably vote for her.
Great. Allison, if you voted for the vice president in the end, it would be why?
I just think her greater trust in the institutions we already have. I think Trump wants to come in and kind of shake things up in a way that I might not be entirely comfortable with. I don't know.
Okay, good. Josh, besides family pressure, if you voted for her, why?
I'd say she, much like Kim has said, she has to articulate her positions as passionately as she does her position about how much she dislikes Trump and how much she is pro-abortion. I need to hear it across the board, what she stands for, so I understand what I'm voting for.
Carl.
Yeah, I think the thing that would, the calculus I would use would be that I live in a consequential state and my vote would be possibly keep Trump out of the White House. I think even though I disagree with her essentially 100% of issues, probably I would use the old PJ O'Rourke calculus that she's wrong on everything, but she's wrong within normal parameters.
Right. Okay. I like the reference. Ellen, what would cause you in the end to vote for the vice president?
I think if she really articulated her precise positions on things. And I did want to go back to the last question because I think I worked in the arts my whole career, and that was going back 40 years. And you really couldn't say, like, the conservatives that I kind of knew because they were old friends of mine, they didn't dare speak up, like, in the art world about what they thought. And now, and I'm a lawyer, so I have a lot of business friends that are lawyers, and people back then, they could talk about anything, Democrat, Republican, there was open debate. And I think their entire society, every single area, families, doesn't matter. And it's very concerning that we can't talk anymore. And it's like everybody, each side's demonized. And so, and that to me is spilled over from the art world and academia. And you hear about it in Hollywood that, people have to hide because of their political views.
Yeah. Carson, if you voted for her in the end, it would be why?
Well, she's supported the positions that I support and don't support. So if she somehow crystallizes all of her positions most of her positions in a way that I guess jibes with what I want. And another nice thing that she had the chance to do that lost my vote was not necessarily taking responsibility for, like, the Afghanistan pullout, those types of things that she likes to take credit for, but not the negative responsibility for either of those two things. That would be one reason I would vote for her.
Great. 3 things. So grateful to all of you for joining us and for sharing. So thank you very much. 2, I'd love for you to stay if you're able to. We may bring you back and have you talk to some other participants if you can. 3, come back on the morning meeting or on two-way tonight between now and Election Day when you reach your decision. We'd love to hear your explanation as to how you decided. And for those in the chat here on two-way and on YouTube who've denigrated these great Keystone Staters, I won't use profanity. I'll show you the presumption of grace, but really, really incredible to denigrate these folks. So please, if that's your attitude about stuff, you don't belong on the platform. thank you all. Stay with us if you can. And next we're going to hear a poll of Pennsylvanians, and you can watch that, and then there'll be a conversation. So thank you all for participating. Very
Thank
grateful
you.
to you.
Thank you.
Thank
Come-
you.
Come
Thank you.
back. All right, David Burrell's now going to come back, and we're going to run through his slides, and then bring in Ann and others to talk about it. So once the deck goes up and the Pennsylvanians go down, David will be here, and David, you can start whenever. I don't know if you're putting up the deck or if Audra is, but whoever is, go to it. Oh, let me unmute you, David. I apologize. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. I know we already went over a little bit of the methodology, so I won't spend too much time on this, but again, very large sample sizes, did really not an oversample of Erie County, which is, been so predictive of the election, or the outcome of Pennsylvania for so many years. There's really its own poll running side by side with the Pennsylvania statewide. So we were able to see some insights. Some of the top lines aren't out of line with what you've seen. So we'll kind of try to get into some of the insights on gender and some other things we're seeing as well. So if you can go next slide. Yeah, all right. So quickly, we'll go through the results. We'll show the where the ballots are statewide, where things are on the issues as well. And then we'll follow each statewide slide with an Erie County slide. I think that one of the biggest stories that we will talk about, needs to be talked about this election, is just how big the gender divide is. And maybe some of the analysts that come on after will talk about how that might relate to the strategy shift, because I think it's very relevant to the strategy shift that Harris particularly has moved towards over the last few weeks. And then last two things, which are definitely relevant for Pennsylvania, but also more broader. I've been doing polling for a long time. We were very accurate in 2020, but some, broader things that we're seeing across all of our polling. If I'm a Republican right now, what am I worried about? And then if I'm a Democrat, what I'm worried about, just, and with a couple of fun things that are a little broad on that side of things. But this will only take a couple minutes, and we'll let the smart analysts come in and talk. Okay, so next slide. Okay, again, SW means statewide. So first thing we're looking at is the actual ballot for president, which did have Trump up, as Mark showed earlier, at almost a point. This is consistent with where we had it last time we polled it as well. And as Mark said, it's really close to national average, but we feel good about it. It's a very large sample size here. And if we move to the next slide, we'll see Erie. This is where things get a little more interesting. I mentioned earlier that the participation rate and polling actually is really, really high when you get close to election, which is great. So many people across all walks of life are very, politically engaged and civically engaged. So they do take a lot, these polls. And so we were able to get a very large sample size in just that county and see that Trump is up 2.3 percentage points in the 5-way ballot test. And so outrunning where he is on the statewide ballot, at least in our polling, but within the margin of error, of course. And if we go to the next slide, what we'll take a quick look at is a hypothetical ballot that we all love to do now in Pennsylvania, where how would things potentially have changed? I guess it's very imperfect to do hypothetical ballots, especially this late in the race. But if she had have chosen Shapiro as her running mate, and again, on that slide before, it was, it did shift things about 2 points. It was more the last time we polled it, but there's less undecideds now. And then if we look at Erie, we see things that are a little bit more intense. It's more of a 5-point shift with, Trump was up, over 2 in Erie. And when we put Shapiro on in the ballot, it shifted it to Harris plus 3.4, or the Harris Shapiro ticket at plus 3.4. So it tells you something about those, counties like Erie that have that diverse suburb population, and kind of with these bellwether counties that we've been looking at across other states as well. So next slide. Then, of course, we did the Casey McCormick head-to-head. We still have Casey up 1.7. So again, really outrunning Harris. Casey is by about almost 3 points on the statewide ballot, which is the key insight there. And then if you move to the next slide, what we want to do is kind of talk a little bit about, Erie. U.S. Senate head-to-head was a little tighter. So kind of reflecting what we also saw when we looked at the change between the presidential race going from the statewide where Trump was up by about 1 to Erie, where he was up more. So this is a little more favorable for Trump in Erie County, or favorable for Republicans. And if we move to the next one. Okay, so we're going to talk about the issues a little bit. You know, we all know what the top issues are. What we did here was say, you know, do the following statements better describe Harris or Trump? You know, good on immigration, good on U.S. economy. Not too surprising, but it's going to be fun to look at the gender breakdowns, as Mark teased earlier, that Trump's was performing well on immigration, crime and safety, and the economy. And Harris's top issue by far was abortion. And then, you know, good for the healthy U.S. democracy. She also outperformed him, but only slightly. Next slide. In addition to the doing Harris-Trump on issues, we saw a very similar thing at Erie as we saw statewide. So we can go ahead and move to the next slide. It pretty much mirrored it. One other thing we wanted to test was these characteristics. And I think we heard this a little bit in the focus group, that there's just a lot about especially the personality of Trump that are keeping undecided voters from pulling the trigger for him. And so we just tried to get a number of, you know, characteristics about, you know, which statements would, do people feel like better describes, do the statements better describe Harris or Trump again here? And you heard on the focus group, people say strong. So you see strong commander in chief. That was one of the 1 or 2 word answers Mark asked for. So you're seeing that reflected here in the poll as one of his strengths. And then top Harris characteristic, which she performed positive on, was intelligence. Next slide. Very similar as we look in Erie County as well. So we can kind of move on from here. And of course, everyone can get this slide deck out later. But we want to kind of get past the top lines, because those are a lot of those y'all seen, maybe not with that big of sample size and not in Erie, but kind of look at some of the gender divide that we're seeing, because that was one of the biggest insights that really jumped off the page when we looked at this. And, you know, in a setting like this, it's interesting to look at. Because, you know, if we look at since 2020, you know, who has, I mean, just generally speaking, since 2020, who has Trump lost ground with? Now, he's still performing poorly with certain demographics, but who has he lost ground with? And educated young females, even as poorly as he did in 2020, what we're seeing, not just in Pennsylvania, but across all of our research that we're doing, our polling company is doing, is he's lost ground with educated young females. But I think more importantly than that, he's lost ground with females 55 and older. And we've seen that consistently. And that's not just in suburbs, that's in rural areas as well. We're seeing that consistently across, you know, almost any poll we're doing in a swing state, or if we're doing, as you know, Senator Santorum was talking about, if you're looking at local polls, state house, state senate, which really can give you some good insights, county polls like we just did in Erie, you're seeing it across the board. It's a very real movement of females 55 and over. And he had not lost them to this. The gap between 16 and 20 was not this extreme. It continues to move in the wrong direction for him. Those are both very, very high propensity turnout groups there, which, you know, I'm sure will be talked about after this. Now, on the flip side, almost every single male demographic, if you can go back, it has moved towards him. And from a female side of things, he has made gains with Hispanic females and then females who have school-age children. So that's a high level what we're seeing across a lot of our polling. And I think most pollsters would probably confirm they're seeing this as well. But let's take a look at just how dramatic the divide's gotten over the past few years. So next slide, we're going to look at those issue questions again. And this is just the statewide. Again, most of the data was very consistent in Erie County. So, you know, on average, of course, you can see very quickly here that on the left, it's all red, and on the right, it's all blue. So males chose Trump over on all of these issues to say they described him better, and females almost chose him on every issue except immigration, which was a tie. But if you look at the spread, the difference between the male and female answers, we're at, you know, high 20s on almost every single one except abortion. This is a huge gap. And again, this is basically like looking at a crosstab here. But, you know, I've never, you know, in our polling, even in 2020, we would not see things like this. As divisive things were then. Then we can kind of go into the characteristics on the next slide that describe the candidates, and you see very similar spreads between where males, what statements are these characteristics, as we're calling them, people think describe Donald Trump or Harris better. So again, high 20s, low 30s in every single one is the gap between how males and females are judging these candidates. So next slide. One other thing, again, we love to add these in Pennsylvania polls. It does appear, for whatever reason, and again, a very imperfect strategy, methodology here on the hypotheticals, but when they were asked, if you look at the crosstabs, when you look at a Harris-Shapiro versus Trump-Vance, and you kind of look at the male and female breakdown of it, Shapiro did perform 10 points better with males as the running mate than Vance did. I'm sorry, than Walz did. My apologies. But again, large gaps, and just wanted to add that in there. So next thing, what we're going to talk about, again, this I think is reflected in the polling, but more high level things we're seeing kind of across the board. If I'm a Republican or Republican strategist, what am I worried about? Or maybe too overconfident about? And then also, what am I worried about if I'm a Democratic strategist or voter? So I call it, we see all these early voting numbers coming in and registration numbers, and you kind of immediately see these narratives coming out on Twitter. I call it Twitter mathing. My head of sampling calls it girl math. But the point is, netting a registration gain does not actually mean you net a Trump vote. And there's way too much going into this. I mean, fortunately, there's a masterclass on it earlier on this program with Rove talking about it. It is still a good sign, but a lot of those gains doesn't necessarily mean Trump's getting a vote. So you can't really draw any one-to-one comparisons. And maybe even if it's just 10 or 20% actually gains in Trump votes in comparison to the actual net registration gain, it's a lot, and it's definitely a good sign, but it is not. It's not necessarily people going to vote for Trump. Shifting a vote from election day to early voting does not actually net you a Trump vote. And then something we saw with this large sample size, but it doesn't matter how many polls we have with Trump winning 20, 30% of the black vote. It doesn't actually mean that, as we've seen in the polls past, that millions of new black votes come for Trump. And there is trends there that we think are real as well. But I think that a lot of the enthusiasm is kind of a flywheel that keeps building because of the narrative around some of these numbers. And don't get me wrong, they're very positive, but they're a little bit overestimated. So, there's other things Republicans can worry about too that people have talked about. I mean, obviously, as we talked about earlier, the two demographic groups that Trump has lost are extremely high propensity voters. So even though I think Trump's gained more in numbers, he's gained more in lower propensity votes. But here's some of the things. And then obviously on the Democratic side of things, if you're a Democrat, on the next slide, you're worried about the people who are not taking polls. Celinda Lake talked about this. Y'all read about it 100 times. That silent Trump voter that evaded pollsters in 2016, 2020 might still not be entering polls and still support Trump. So you can think you have the right number of independents, Republicans, and Democrats, but you don't have all the right types. You're missing something. I also would say, to the second point here, polling, it's, you can read about this, the challenges. George Gallup would write about it, but many other academics have written about the challenges of polling, and we don't have healthy democracies. And if RFK support was ever over 20% or even in the high teens, and his voters got disenfranchised because they're pretty much told, no, we will do anything to make sure you don't have a primary or, be a candidate on a ballot. A lot of times that creates disenfranchisement. Those type of people don't take polls. So if there's I think a lot of those actions, as we saw, it moved a lot of the Kennedy voters towards Trump, which is why now they want him on the ballot. The Democratic Party wants him on the ballot. But I would suspect that a percentage of Trump voters or former Kennedy voters are actually not participating in polls, but may turn out to vote. And I think that could have a huge outcome on the election. And even if it's just 10% of them that got so disenfranchised because of what they felt like was done to their candidate that 20 or 30 million people wanted to vote for. So that to me is the hidden thing that no one can really measure. I can't tell you for a fact that it's happening, but it's very possible that disenfranchised people who don't feel like they're represented in democracy, they don't take polls, but they might turn out to vote.
David, thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. That's awesome. Thank you. Ann is here. I have the pleasure and honor of working with David now, but I used to get to work with Ann, one of America's best. Ann, we'd love if you talk as much or as little about your thoughts about the poll.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you, David, for sending me the crosstabs, which, you know, any pollster, they're immediately going to want to dive in, and I did. And I did do a little bit of comparison to the exit polls from 2020, and I have a handful of points to make. We mentioned the gender gap. One of the things that I thought was very interesting is that it is pretty much the same in terms of Trump leading with men as it is Harris leading with women. In some states, you're seeing a much bigger divide with a bigger margin among men and a smaller margin among women. And when Celinda and I were here, we talked about that it seemed to be men driving the gender gap this season. And these data suggest, in fact, it's even on both sides. And the exit poll from 2020 showed the same dynamic, but a smaller margin. So now the margin is 15, roughly 15 percentage points more men for Trump, 15 percentage points more. It was 10 in the exit polls last time. So that the polarization, the widening of the gender gap is evident in your data. The second point I think is really interesting, and I'm not seeing it covered very much, but my polls show what your polls are showing, which is in terms of age, it's the younger people who are in favor of Harris. She leads there with the under 45 by 7 points. And then the middle age, 45 to 64, is Trump. And he's got a margin of 12 points there. But age 65 and over, which people have thought for a long time, the older you get, the more conservative you get. But Harris is actually leading with that group. So you have a funny kind of curve there. And as I said, I'm seeing that in my polling in Iowa as well. But I went to look at the exit polls from last time, and Trump won the 65 and over vote by 7 points. And now Harris in your poll is leading by 4. And I'd be very, very interested in more analysis and maybe more commentary from the people who are on here. Third point is about the geography and about Philadelphia and the suburbs versus the rest of state. And I had to get out my trusty calculator, and I'm always excited when I'm able to remember how to do weighted averages just by doing the math. I think the thing that is interesting, just eyeballing your data, it's about 55% of the vote outside Philly is going to Trump. It's about 2/3 of the voters in the state, if it's the same dynamic as we saw in 2020. But in your poll, Biden is getting 55 to Trump's 49 in Philly. The exit poll had Harris 55 to 39. But in the exit poll, Biden got 66. So you got Harris getting 55. And if that's where all where she's going to run up the vote, it's 1/3 of the voters in the state. And she's way lower. To me, that sort of is a fire sign for what's going on and where it is she's likely to be concentrating her effort, I think. And then the final, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to make a comment on that, and I think, you know, that was one thing Mark brought up to Senator Santorum as well, is like what's happening in here. What would you? I think that's a key dynamic of, you know, what is happening in that area, and is that data real? Hopefully it is. Obviously, we did the poll, but that's where
if it is,
it's got to be closer to 65 or, you know, or so for things to move her way.
Yeah, and before I give you my fourth point, I don't know if Senator Santorum is still here, but in my conference room, his face is on my wall because he had an enormous surge ahead of the Iowa caucuses in 2012, and none of us have ever forgotten, and we speak of Senator Santorum frequently in caucus season. The last point, and this is really a question to toss out to the team, and Mark, maybe particularly to you. I looked at the breakdown in terms of how people think who is better on the abortion question, and your slide showed this, that the narrowest of margin was among men. They're a little bit more Trump, but barely. It's basically tied. And it made me wonder, and Mark, question for you. I don't know that I'm seeing, but maybe you are, any messaging on the abortion issue that is tailored specifically to men. I don't know that I'm seeing men being asked to base their vote and why it would be to their advantage. I'm not seeing it, but I think that's strikingly finding, given that the other issues, it was consistent, men versus women, and lining up behind their chosen champion there.
And thank you. Stay with us. We have some incredible Pennsylvanians. Not since the Darryl Dawkins-led 76ers team have we gotten so many great Pennsylvanians in one place. And Brad Todd is an honorary Pennsylvanian who's working with Dave McCormick. So I want to start with Danielle Gross, who's a supporter of Senator Casey, who couldn't be with us. We gave a lot of time to David McCormick. So Danielle, I don't know how much of the presentation you were able to see, but would love your overview of the race, how you think Senator Casey is doing, and what you think will decide who wins both the presidential electoral votes and the Senate race. And thank you for joining. Thank you.
Well, I was just asked at 1:30 this afternoon when I was taking my kids to their eye doctor appointment. So I didn't really put a presentation together.
No, you don't need to present, just comment. Okay,
good. I'm actually originally from Cambria County, and I live in Northern York County. So, I'm a Casey supporter. I'm a Democrat, but I do not in any way, shape, or form live in any kind of bubble, right? So it's really interesting. I think what I'm seeing in the Casey race is a lot of what we saw in the Oz-Fetterman race, that the people I talk to on both sides of the aisle seem to have the same opinion of McCormick as they do of then candidate Dr. Oz, where, they don't get it, why this guy is coming from out of state, spending millions and millions of dollars to become a senator here. And Senator Casey, has a long history of service to Pennsylvania. And is not known as, one of our firebrands in Congress by any means. He's really a slow and steady guy. And the people who know him and who have followed him, I think, really respect that of the senator. And to me, I think the senator is going to win. I think he's going to pull it off with a decent margin. The Muhlenberg poll that was just released with three other battleground counties in Pennsylvania showed Casey up 7 and 8 points in Northampton and Lehigh counties, for example. I don't know how many battleground counties we can have in Pennsylvania, but it seems like we sure have a lot.
Yeah. You've got more than any other state for some reason.
Yeah. And I personally think Cumberland County will be very interesting to watch on election night.
Danielle, on the presidential, and then I want Brad Todd to respond. On the presidential, how do you handicap the vice president's chances versus Donald Trump's?
Yes. Well, again, I keep thinking back to 2016. Again, as a Cambria County native, I was the only person, one of the very few people I knew in Harrisburg who kept telling everyone, Clinton's not going to win. Trump is going to win this. I went home to Cambria County and I saw homemade signs in people's yards where I had never in my entire life seen political signs for. But really, when I go back home, and trust me, people love to talk to me about politics because, I work in the big city of Harrisburg. And they all like to tell me their political opinions. But I am really not hearing the same kind of enthusiasm, the same kind of widespread enthusiasm for Trump as I had even 4 years ago. That really seems to be waning from the people that I speak to. So I believe that Harris will win in Pennsylvania. I do think it will be close, perhaps a half a point closer than Biden, but I do think that Kamala Harris will win Pennsylvania.
Okay. Brad, Todd, I'd love for you to critique the focus group or the poll and whether things you found interesting or things you disagreed with or whatever you'd want to say about either of those.
Well, I have a lot of respect for Ann Selzer's polling. I don't have a lot of respect for virtually any public pollster except her and a couple others. It's a very small list, and you're lucky to have her. I think the presidential race in Pennsylvania is going to be close because Pennsylvania has there's a low ceiling for Donald Trump and there's a high floor, so it's going to be close. However, I am been pretty confident for quite some time that the Trump campaign is going to have a victory in Pennsylvania. I think he will win by as much as 2 points. Maybe it doesn't quite get to 2 points, but I said on CNN 2 weeks ago that I thought he was going to win by as much as 2, and I'm pretty comfortable in that. And the reasons are as following, and then we'll get to the Senate race in a second. But Kamala Harris is uniquely unsuited to Pennsylvania. It's maybe the only swing state where she's a weaker nominee for Democrats than Joe Biden was. We had a persistent group of voters through the first year of this campaign where we could look at them demographically and on issues, and it made no sense that they were sticking with Joe Biden when other people who were like them were not. And that's because Joe Biden had a very deep familiarity to a lot of Pennsylvanians. You know, he bragged he was the 3rd senator of Pennsylvania. Wilmington's in the Philadelphia market. As president, he's done more events in Pennsylvania than anywhere, more official events there. And so that's the kind of thing you can't campaign your way out of. So we were actually probably more excited about the switch from Biden to Harris than anybody who's not a Democrat, because we felt like she's just uniquely unsuited to it in a couple of ways. You know, the fracking problem has dogged her throughout this campaign, and Bob Casey has not really done a ton to get away from it. I don't think any Pennsylvanian thinks that she's really for fracking all of a sudden when she's still got an LNG ban that they put in place this calendar year. We've used that to great effect. It's about 350,000 jobs in Pennsylvania, direct and indirect. That's a big piece. We think her record on crime is not good enough for Philadelphia, where we think that's a very key issue. And this list goes on. And Pennsylvania is a working class state. She's pursued an upper class coalition in her campaign. You see it now. She's chasing Nikki Haley voters who are college educated, suburbanite Republicans here at the last minute. We don't think that is the right strategy to win Pennsylvania. We don't think you can win it without a working class coalition. So we also think this presidential race has translated to the Senate race far more than any of us thought it would at the start. You know, where there are jerseys are on in Pennsylvania in this. And I'll give you some examples. In the city of Philadelphia, right now, Kamala Harris is polling at 77. Bob Casey's polling at 74. In the Philadelphia suburbs, Kamala Harris is polling at 54. And Bob Casey's polling at 52. In the T, they're both polling at 39. There's just no separation between those two, and that's come as some surprise. I think some of it's handicappers thought Senator Casey had a bigger brand than it's turned out he has, and I think there are some reasons for that. Bob Casey Sr., the former governor, was popular because he was a different kind of Democrat. He was viewed as more conservative, sort of a labor Democrat. Bob Casey Jr., version 1.0, was similarly viewed. However, he had not been tested in a tough election year. It wasn't good for Democrats, and I don't think that brand was as deep as people assumed it was because of the famous name. And secondly, he switched. He's changed in this term. He moved sharply to the left. He gave up his family's signature distinction on the issue of life, which I think is going to hurt him a good bit in the T. Abortion certainly is going to give him some votes, but it's going to take some votes from him that he previously had. And that makes him unique among Democrats, someone who's going to lose votes because of his current abortion position as well. So all those things put together, Dave's been a fantastic candidate. He's worked hard. He's raised more money than any challenger on the Republican side around the country. That's enabled us to be pretty even with the Casey campaign in September and October. They kicked our butts on TV all summer. We kind of had to pick a time frame when we were going to get seriously outgunned. So we got outgunned in the summer. We went up in the spring pretty heavy and introduced Dave. And then it's been, they've endured the summer. But this fall, while we've been pretty comparable on broadcast, and we're not at full parity, don't get me wrong, no Republican is. Every race in every level of politics this year, Democrats will outspend Republicans, and this race is no different. But when we've been near parity this fall, we've been gaining constantly. Senator Casey, I think, has polled within a 2-point range for 2 years. We just don't have a poll where he does not come in the same range. That's never good for an incumbent. I've been involved in 6 races where challengers beat Democrat senators. This one feels like all of those felt at this time. And if you look at the surveys, you look at the undecided voters, and we think they're clustered on inflation. We think they're wrong track voters. We think Donald Trump's going to win those undecided voters by 15 or 20 points. And we think because the rest of the races conform to that presidential model, we will also get most of those votes. So we feel very good about where we are. And I think there's a much better chance that this race breaks even more than what I'm talking about toward our direction than there is a chance of it breaking the other way. The wind is just has a very clear direction here.
Right, Brad, thank you. Selena Zito, the Dean of the Pennsylvania Press Corps, we're really pleased and honored for you to be here. Love to hear your comments on the focus group and how much that matches or differs from what you've experienced as talking to all the voters you talked to in the Commonwealth.
Well, I'm the dean of the press corps because I'm the oldest person in the press corps now. I don't know how that happens. You go from being the young new person and all of a sudden you're the old person. But I like dean. I'll stick with that. So I didn't hear all of the focus group, but I will tell you what I'm seeing on the ground in Pennsylvania. I just got back from a 67 county tour. I focused a lot on smaller counties because what you need to see in these smaller counties is enthusiasm level, and you need to see where it is, not just in a very rural area, but in concentrated small towns. And Cambria County is a perfect example of where you see I'm going to have to disagree with your other guest. There is a large enthusiasm for Trump, and there's 20,000, 30,000 more new registered Republicans since 2016 in that county. I think that to Brad's point, what I am seeing, and again, this is anecdotal, I don't go by polling in the more traditional sense. I try to pick up on where I'm going. Place is really important. I would put this in Trump's corner at this moment, narrowly, but he appears to have his wind on the back, in his back. And I think where a lot of people are missing is that where he is winning is the middle class. And Brad and I have had this discussion. This race may be decided by a barber, a cosmetologist, a welder, a fireman, as the Democratic Party has shed that legacy New Deal Democrat, right? A little more centrist, a little more conservative, pro-life, owns a gun, or, pretty iffy on the life issue, right? They don't go full pro-choice. These voters have moved away from the Democratic Party, and they have changed the Republican Party. And they're not just white working class. I think there is this thing that happens, that there's a bit of a blind spot where we tend to think white working class votes a certain way, then black working class votes a certain way, then Hispanic working class votes a certain way. And that has become muddled in the past 8 years. And I see Hispanic working class, middle class, people that own small businesses, people that own, that work with their hands. They're the ones that are sort of invisible, that people aren't seeing. And I think they're driving this election. Harris's problem in my state has been that she's never really had to win over electorally. She's never had to win over a conservative Democrat or an independent voter, because when she ran in California, I think she ran against a Democrat. Is that correct?
When she ran for AG, she ran against a Republican.
No, I
A
meant for
Democrat.
as
For
Senate.
Senate, she ran
Yeah,
against a Democrat. Yeah.
So, so I think she's been challenged as to how to connect with that voter in a meaningful way, in a way that is persuadable, and I think that has been her challenge in my state. I wouldn't say that in every state, but in Pennsylvania, it's not. It's been it's like a square into a peg into a round hole. It's been a difficult thing for her in my state.
Okay, so thank you. Robert Gracie, backdrop of your office befits a lawyer who worked in the Attorney General's office and is a retired judge. We're grateful for you to joining. Tell folks if you're supporting a candidate in the presidential race and the Senate race, and what your perspective is on this.
Given my work with Keep Our Republic, which is what brings me to your show this evening, Mark, and I appreciate being invited, I am not publicly endorsing any candidates. As you know, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. And in order to maintain that, while I have my views, I keep them to myself.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, you haven't been with us for a previous episode where we've dealt with Keep Our Republic. This is a group operating in the three Great Lakes states to try to make sure that we have a fair and free election that is in a bipartisan way seen as it should be. Your state, you had a ruling yesterday, I think, or maybe this morning, on yesterday on absentee ballots that come in something incorrect. People are going to be allowed to cast. In the last cycle, you had pre-election and post-election, many casting and counting rulings. What do you anticipate in Pennsylvania this time? The same kind of rush to the courthouse before and after election day to tamper with the rules, or is the legislature and the courts going to be more rational and efficient?
Well, I don't recall from the 2020 election the legislature being overly involved in this last minute activity.
I meant more passively on the front end, failing to get ahead of it. But
well, and they did things since the 2020 election. They have made changes to the process, things that they saw that were that could be improved. They didn't make all the improvements that some people thought, and I'm using the word improvements in quotes. They didn't make all the improvements that some people thought they should have, but they did make things in the legislature's view better. They provided more money. They provided money for training, and hopefully, and I think history has shown us since the 2020 election, the counting of the ballots has gone more quickly, so that we're getting results more quickly. I don't think this time around we're going to be waiting till Saturday to get the results from Pennsylvania. I think they should be done earlier. That doesn't mean, and this is one of the things that we here at Keep Our Republic have been reminding people, the fact that things take a while doesn't mean there's fraud. It means that the process is going on. In Pennsylvania, a lot of people don't realize they can't start. You might have submitted your ballot. You might have hand delivered it today. Can't be opened until 7 o'clock in the morning on election day. And when you look at the numbers, I understand 1 million ballots were requested. 500,000 have already been submitted. You can't even undo the envelopes. You can't flatten the ballot out to put it through the counter until 7 o'clock on election morning. And in the meantime, everything else that's going on with an election is going on. So do I expect to see the same types of challenges? Yes, unfortunately. We've already seen some things. We're still seeing some last minute, and I certainly don't blame the courts for this. People are bringing challenges at the last minute. Just a couple of weeks ago, there was a suit filed in federal court claiming that there was a disconnect between the Pennsylvania voter identification law and the overseas ballot and military absentee ballot law. And they've asked a federal judge to stop those counting of those ballots. As I understand the challenge, traditionally going up to the United States Supreme Court, including the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, they issued an opinion a couple of weeks ago, or an order, I should say, saying we're not going to entertain challenges this late and perhaps upset the apple cart by emergency petitions. They're still going to, as they did yesterday, they're still going to resolve cases that have come before them in the ordinary course of appellate litigation. And that's what happened yesterday. But they're not going to jump in at the last minute and perhaps, as you the term you used, Mark, potentially change the rules. They're not going to do that, and that's a good thing, because to change the rules and then you have election workers who don't know what's going on, can't explain things necessarily, that causes suspicion. And certainly one of the things that we as an organization are trying to combat is that type of disinformation. We're trying to get the information out there that what happens when you cast your vote. More importantly, perhaps, Mark, what happens after you cast your vote? Because the vote on November 5th for the president is not a final vote, because we have to go through the electoral process, the electoral college, the votes in 50 states and the District of Columbia to finally make the determination as to who got sufficient electoral votes to be the next president. And that takes time. So, but I foresee challenges the way we had them. I hope, and you identified, Mark, I am a lawyer, have been a lawyer for almost 50 years, which I look around the group here and I think I'm probably the oldest one on camera. And I apologize for that for anybody who has to look at this mug. If lawyers have learned the hard way, several lawyers have been disciplined. Rudy Giuliani has been disbarred for bringing lawsuits for which there was no factual basis. Remember, in Pennsylvania, he stood before Judge Brand, a very conservative judge in the Middle District of Pennsylvania. I heard somebody describe him as a card-carrying member of the Federalist Society. And when Mr. Giuliani stood up and the judge said, "I understand you're alleging fraud," he said, "No, there's no fraud. We're not alleging fraud." But they did allege fraud, but they didn't have proof. And one of the things we try to remind voters as we go out and talk to groups, I've talked to bar groups. We had a town hall a couple of weeks ago with former Governor Corbett, Secretary Schmidt, that there's a process. And if somebody comes to you and say there was fraud in the election, ask them, where's your proof? What was fraudulent? Was it a delay? A delay isn't fraud. A delay is built into the system in Pennsylvania. If that's what it is, and we know, I was a candidate in Pennsylvania, 1995, however many years ago, it's coming up on 30 years. Back then, things were a little bit different. We didn't have no excuse mail-in ballots, of course, but returns came in dribs and drabs. I got a call in the evening that night from the AP reporter, said, "Mr. Gracie, we're about to call the election for you." And then she stopped. She wanted to comment. She said, "We're about to call the election for you." No, "We're about to call the election for your opponent." I said, "Did I understand when you first called me, you were going to call the election for me?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Can you tell me what happened?" She said, "No." I said, "Can you tell me where the outstanding votes are?" She said, "No." I said, "Well, I don't know that I can comment. You know, was I supposed to concede at that point? If President Truman had conceded to Mr. Dewey, he still would have been president."
Yeah.
But we're trying to educate people as to how the process works. What happens after they cast their vote? Why does it take time?
Yeah.
And
Judge Gracie.
Yes.
Sorry. We're going to stay in touch with you because I suspect we're going to be needing your help in a couple of weeks. We're grateful for you to be here. Charles McKelwey writes for Real Clear Pennsylvania, for City Journal, for Politico. You've been covering the state. Just tell us your perspective. Pick up on anything that's been discussed or anything about Pennsylvania point you want to make.
Yeah, I think one important point when we talk about this race that people tend to forget is that Pennsylvania has changed dramatically since 2016, and this race will test the mosaic of the state, the fact that it is so culturally fractious, the fact that certain working class regions of the state differ from others, and not all of suburbia is the same. So in the case of suburbia, for example, you look at Western Pennsylvania and Allegheny County, Cranberry Township looks like so many suburbs, vast suburban sprawl. This is an area that is increasingly becoming Republican, is growing, and it's in a county that has lost 50,000 jobs in the past 5 years. And there's a sense of local discontent when it comes to local leadership and also the economy. You go east on the turnpike, South Central Pennsylvania. This is the heart of the healthcare boom of the state. So the east and west shore of Harrisburg This is where it's becoming increasingly transient. There's much more growth. Hospitals have sprouted, and communities that were once reliably Republican, like the West Shore towns of Camp Hill or on the East Shore, Hershey, home to Penn State Health, they're becoming reliably Democrat. You go farther east, the Lehigh Valley, Upper Macungie Township, becoming increasingly Democrat, but there's also increasing transience there in terms of this is a region that's becoming the youngest part of the state. Working class. So many cities, Mark, east of the Susquehanna River now have majority or plurality Latino population. In 2016, we didn't have the sense that we have now, that it appears that in places like Hazleton, Allentown, and Reading, now the fourth largest city in the state, Latino voters appear to be engaged and perhaps mobilized to vote for Trump. And we will not know the margins of this voting bloc until after the election. But of course, we also have working class regions like northeastern Pennsylvania, which was once a Democratic bastion, home of staunch Catholic Democrats. Let's call it Bob Casey's original base. And that's becoming Republican. But as the polling presentation showed earlier, it's interesting that voters age 65 and older may be favoring Harris. And that may be a test of how many of those staunch old Democrats that still revere Casey, for example, may turn out and help with the statewide margins in places like the Abingtons, the suburb of Scranton. But Senator Santorum noted something very important at the beginning of this talk. The working class regions aren't limited to the Northeast or West. Plenty of working class areas in suburban Philadelphia, in Delco, and in Lower Bucks, which played a major role in the county narrowly flipping red. So I think when you look at the statewide map, you can almost use the Blue Ridge, part of the Appalachian Mountains that lines the Cumberland and Lebanon valleys as a line of demarcation. And south of it, these are regions that are becoming increasingly transient. There's Latino growth in cities. They're becoming more suburban and perhaps more purple. North of it, you have northeastern Pennsylvania. And if Trump pulls this out in Pennsylvania, it will be because of his overperformance in this region compared to 20. If Harris wins, it's her overperformance in a place like South Central Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Charles, thank you. If Selena is the dean of the press corps, Larry Seisler is the godfather of all of Pennsylvania politics. Larry.
Oh, man. Oh,
just
man.
Tell us, just tell us just your overview of where you think the presidential and the Senate race stand now, if you would.
Okay. I'm going to try to be fast and simple. Okay. In terms of the presidential, Biden won the state 4 years ago by what? 80,000 votes. Harris is just not going to do as well as Biden will. So she has to make it up somewhere. So where's she going to make it up? I don't think she can make it up in the Philadelphia suburbs because I believe they voted at a clip of like 82% 4 years ago. So I don't see them going much above that. I think she has to increase turnout in the city of Philadelphia. And she's going to have to find a way to get 100,000 more votes out of Philadelphia. And so I think this is all about Philadelphia. And I know the Harris campaign's working it. I mean, I'm not the target of that, but you have a lot happening on the ground to try to turn them out. So that's where I see it. In terms of the Casey McCormick race, it's funny, you had the presentation, from Erie. I just happened to get a state Senate poll from Erie that's a couple days old. Now, granted, I think there are 2 state Senate seats in Erie, so this is one of them. And that one showed Casey up, I wrote it down, showed Casey up by, what was it? Casey was up by 4. And
thank you, Danielle.
Oh, she knew that one?
She had the
you
same
got
poll.
that one too? And then Kamala Harris was up 50-47.
Yeah.
So but that was one of 2 state Senate seats. And then I was talking to Matt Cartwright today, who's a congressman in northeastern Pennsylvania. And he has it's interesting, he's a Democrat, and Trump won his district. And Kamala obviously she's down 52-44, but Biden while he was still a candidate, he was down 12. And so she's cut that. And Biden lost his district by 2.9. But in terms of the Senate race, I look at it this way. Bob Casey is going to win, ironically, he is going to win this race because of abortion. And I say that ironically, as everybody knows, because of his history. And I would venture to say, and this has nothing to do politically, I was born in the same hospital as Dave McCormick. And I have known people in Washington County, and I've known people who've been in every part of his life. And I would bet you anything, the day before he decided to run against Mehmet Oz, if you would have asked him, he was pro-choice. And I think that's Dave McCormick's problem, because Dave McCormick lacks genuineness. And I think Pennsylvanians see that. They see him, that he was twisted as a candidate. I don't think he's ever been able to present himself as a real candidate, as who he is. Look at him from the Oz days as this gun-toting guy whose mother, who was a college president's wife, she's a gun-toter, you know, the whole thing. And they see him as coming here from Connecticut, and obviously he's from Pennsylvania originally. And I think that's his problem, is that he's not genuine. But I think at the end of the day, it's abortion that's going to win it for Casey. And it is going to be close. And as everybody has said, it is true. Bob Casey he's never had a tough election. When he ran against Rick Santorum, I think he was up double digits from day one, and it never diminished from there. So that is that's my simple way of looking at it.
Thank you, Larry. I'll let people who watch the Dave McCormick interview draw their own conclusions about whether he's genuine.
I didn't see it.
Okay, we'll get it to you. Robert, welcome in. Thank you for your patience. Tell folks where you are, who you're supporting for president, and what's on your mind for this group.
So I'm in the Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania area, actually right in Northampton County, one of the swing areas, and have respect for everybody here. And let me just say, is fabulous, absolutely fabulous platform, because it's very sage and sober and deals with all the issues. I will be. Well, I'm sorry, I already have voted for Donald Trump for president. I did vote straight Republican here, and am active in the Scott Pressler group, which is early vote action. And we have a lot of Kennedy supporters who came over and helped with that effort. So I'm seeing things on the front line here.
You've got a question for the group?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, and again, I really appreciate this forum. I would have to say that everybody's just thrown such great information out there. The mother of two of my beloved children, who I'm still very active in parenting with, and they're actually in the background behaving very quietly, was a legal immigrant from the Dominican Republic, and we brought her over here in 2016 of all time periods, curiously enough. I would have to say that, is there any real work that's being done to truly gauge what's going on in the Hispanic community by the people here? Because I'm seeing them as almost universally for Donald Trump.
Charles?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the city. So in the case of Allentown, you have an older Latino population that dates after World War II. People who came from Puerto Rico, to work in steel mills, for example. And this is an area in the Lehigh Valley that has deeper ties to Metro New York, and therefore relatives in Metro New York and frames of reference that may apply to the migrant crisis, for example. And in my reporting for Politico earlier this year, I talked about this emerging Latino belt. And when I talked to Hispanic voters in the area, it was not so much direct engagement. There was lacking engagement by both parties. In the case of Republicans, just a total absence. In the case of Democrats, taking the Latino vote for granted. But organically, there was a palpable enthusiasm for Trump even then. And that has been the case where my family's originally from, in Hazleton. If you go there, It's the same deal.
Yeah, it is. And I would have to say that as a child, I lived in Hazleton for a number of years, have gone back over time, and the Hispanic community has completely revitalized Hazleton from the coal crash that I remember of the 1970s that took place up there. I mean, they're such a part of our community in Eastern Pennsylvania and even South Central Pennsylvania and York and such. I would have to agree with that, and I would have to say that illegal immigration. I'm involved in real estate out here, and two comments I would make. One, it's amazing to me just being Caucasian, and I'm bilingual, and I have great relationship with the community, but those Puerto Ricans that you're talking about in our area, waves that came in over time, they complain about all the new Hispanic and Latino people coming in. It's like, hey, we're here now. I said, hey, those are your people. And it's, well, I know, but we're here now. It's amazing.
Robert, thank you. Thank you, Robert. Thank you. Appreciate it. Tom, go ahead.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I'm calling from the battleground state of California, and I am one of the few Harris supporters in the chat right now. But I wanted to make an observation, which is I think trying to convince everyone that Harris is this amazing candidate is a fool's errand. Like, we all know that she's a generic Democrat. She didn't perform well in the primaries last time, but the alternative is what I consider a unpredictable, unhinged, unconstitutional 80-year-old man. And so, to me, we don't need to tell everybody that Harris is like, a Mensa member. Look at the alternative, and people have to make a choice. And I'm hoping that enough people, like there were some undecideds in the focus group earlier who you could tell were really reluctant to pull the lever for Trump. And so I think, next week, we're going to get some new GDP data, some new unemployment data. And if inflation remains under control, they may say, well, I don't love Harris, but things are trending okay. And I just don't know what I'm going to get with a second Trump term.
Tom, thank you. Danielle, am I putting you too much on the spot to ask you to respond to that?
That's okay, because that actually reminded me, I think Tom is right. That really is the case for a lot of Harris supporters, and that's fine. Like, you don't have to have a perfect candidate to vote for them. And I think a lot of the Trump support and is rooted in the fact that he has this brand and this mystique. I was watching earlier in the focus group, and you asked whether the Pennsylvanians would vote for Harris or Trump as a governor of Pennsylvania. I thought it would have been interesting if you had said, did you vote in the gubernatorial election in Pennsylvania, and did you vote for Mastriano or Shapiro? Because we had perhaps one of the Trumpiest candidates for governor in Doug Mastriano in our last gubernatorial election, and Josh Shapiro absolutely trounced him. So I think it's interesting how sometimes I think some people can't separate the realities of Trump's policies and from his personality or his brand.
Yeah,
I think Larry wants to talk.
Yeah. Mark, I just wanted to make one point in terms of Latino Hispanic voters. And Charles, you may know this better than I do, but I will tell you, in Philadelphia, where we have a large Hispanic population, they vote at the lowest clip of any group, and that has never changed. And even though they had a Hispanic candidate for district attorney a few years ago, they were still voting in 10-15%. So I think unless there's something different in the rest of the state, I think some of this talk about the strength of that vote is probably a little overblown.
Yeah, Larry, it's a great point, because we really don't know what the numbers will look like. We won't know until after the election, but historically, very low turnout. And we even saw this in off-year elections. And a few years ago in the city of Allentown, for example, a lifelong Puerto Rican man that ran as Republican, and he was defeated by Matt Turk, who is now the mayor of the city. So if mobilized, the enthusiasm appears to be for Trump, but it's a matter of if there will be turnout.
Okay, Tom, I loved what you said. I'm not saying I supported it or agree with it, but really insightful and represents again what a lot of people are thinking, and I've not heard it expressed quite the way you did. So thank you for that. Charles, thank you. Danielle, thank you. Larry, thank you. Judge Gracie, thank you, and everybody else who participated, and David Burrell for doing the great poll. We're going to send the poll around when we send around shortly the video of this full 2 hours. We'll send around the poll, and so you can use that, and you can feel free to share it with anybody you wish. And again, we're pretty proud of it because we think it's distinctive. And of course, very grateful to the folks who participated in the focus group. And I hope you enjoyed that and learned from that as I did. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern time, right back here, 13 hours from now. Sean, I think, is coming back, and Dan for sure for the morning meeting. And couldn't be more grateful to all the Pennsylvanians who participated tonight, including Dave McCormick and everybody else, and for Charles and others who lent their expertise. And Ann, thank you all. Have a great evening, and thank you again.